everybody, it's Lacey,
And I'm Lauren.
and welcome to another episode of the Lawmas podcast.
And today, I know we've been talking about doing our women series, and we are getting there, but we've just found some things that have came up that we want to talk about. So today, we're going to talk about the death penalty because it is a big topic, and I guess not so much like opinion-wise on it.
Right.
There's strong opinions, but more about what it is, when it gets charged, like when you can bring it, how it works, and also like why or why not the prosecution may put it on the table and then why it's taken off. And I think one of the big reasons we did this is the Indiana case recently. The family is quite mad that, well, it seems the families are split. Some of the families are happy they're not having to go to trial and he's going to be in jail, and the other parts of the families are mad because they wanted the death penalty. So we just wanted to kind of talk about it a little bit and give you more information on it.
Yeah. And, it kind of came up this with Brian Kohlberger. Yes, it came up. But then also, I just think people don't understand like how trials work. And I think that's such a big part in whether or not you support a sentence. Like, I was coming back from Florida with my mom, and my mom said that she felt that people convicted, like that pled to crimes involving children, and you can insert which crimes I'm talking about, are often very lenient. And I understand why she feels that way. And Lauren, do you even keep up with those sentences or anything? Did you feel they're
Well,
lenient?
I will say there is a person that we graduated high school with that is a convicted pedophile. Um,
I know who you're
he
talking about.
he molested children at his mom's daycare. He is now out and he is working at a company in our hometown. And I think if you molest children, I think his sentence was way too short. I feel like that is some of the worst things you can do. Um, I'm one of those people, if one of those parents had killed him after that, I probably would not have had any ill will to those parents and supported them 100%. I guess raping a child, I think, is one of the worst things you can do. So I do think
Agreed.
sometimes their sentences are too lenient because it's
Mhm.
not just about what they did, but you do this to a child, that child may never recover and you've ruined their life
Yeah.
too. So I do agree with your mom. Sometimes they're too lenient on those.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with my mom, but I told her the reason it oftentimes work out to this, and this is a common theory when you're talking about death penalty cases, is what goes on in a trial. So defense lawyers know that in order to make a case, more than likely, almost always, that child is going to have to take the stand to make their case. So a child that's been through the most traumatic thing they could probably have ever endured, right? That's one of the most traumatic things a kid could ever be put through, would also be put on the stand in a trial if you don't reach a plea negotiation. And solicitors know that too, and they don't want to do that. The defense attorneys don't want to do that, right? If we get so they do what's called a forensic interview, we get that evidence. If it is credible, if this goes to trial, that means this child is going to be put on a stand in front of 12 jurors that they don't know, a judge they don't know, lawyers they don't know, cross-examined by a lawyer they don't know, in a courtroom full of people they don't know, with their accuser right there, because that accuser still has constitutional rights, right? So think of the layers of trauma involved in trying a case, right? So oftentimes you're going to see more lenient sentences that you're comfortable with, and probably the lawyers are comfortable with either, because it's going to prevent putting the kid through more trauma. And that
And
is, yeah.
can I make it? I understand that, but then what's going to be more traumatic when you were molested at 5 and 10 years later you're 15 and he's out? I mean, I guess like I get it for the sake of a child, but like at the
Yeah.
same point, like if it's going to make his sentence be so short that because this guy I went to high school with went to jail for less than 10 years and molested, I think, 5 to 10 kids ages from 3 to 14. So if they come out and they know he's out and about, what's more traumatic? What do you live with more fear with? I guess I know I'm not a child psychologist and they definitely need to be involved in those decisions, but
Yeah.
what's worse?
Yeah. But I think parents a lot of times are making these decisions. I think parents are saying, if they, yeah, no, I want this, and if not, we'll be there. I'll bring them, we'll go through a trial. But if they're seeing their kid go through a horrible time and they're in therapy and they're so traumatized, I can understand a parent looking at a prosecutor and saying, I'm not putting my kid through this. And I could not never fault a parent through that because they are dealing with the kid at that time in that moment. And I don't think we can fault them if they say, I can't put my kid through this, because most likely those parents also have guilt that it even happened to begin with, even though there's probably nothing they could have done, differently. So to tie that in, I just want to stress the importance of trauma in a trial. And yeah, go ahead.
I will say I had a case, and mine was civil, and we had one of our plaintiffs was a plaintiff in the case. She was, I think, only 19, 20. And I will say we had a very, very strong case. I felt very confident if we had had to go to trial on it. But we ended up settling that case for a decent amount of money. But I think if we went to trial, there possibly could have been more money on the table.
Hmm.
But granted, attorney's fees would have significantly increased. But she couldn't handle going through a trial. And this was nothing, this
Right.
was not anything super emotional. This was money we were arguing about, but she just did not want to be put on the
Yeah.
stand. So, I mean, there are people, even adults, that just don't want to testify because they just don't want to be put on she was very smart, very intelligent girl, but that freaked her out so much.
Yeah. So, in what we view as leniency, right, there may be cases that plead out, like Brian Kohlberger, where you feel that that is too lenient of a punishment. He deserved death. Look at how many people he murdered, and now convicted of those. And I don't know the whole case and the extent. I think I overheard like a podcast or something talk about. I guess his cell phone pinged or something like in the area. I think the argument there would have been premeditation. Um, when you have four lives lost, and this is an adult that caused it, if they did have evidence of premeditation, for somebody that does believe in the death penalty, why would the prosecutor not do that? And thinking about what these victims would have to endure, I mean, think of the photos that would have been shown in trial when they're going through this case, right? And from what I've heard, the state's case was pretty strong. And I mean, he did plead guilty, so I'd imagine it was a pretty strong case for him to plead guilty to all those with the life sentence. But all those families would have had to endure that. And this is a trial that probably would have taken a few weeks. So if you plan on attending that trial as a family member of these victims, and I think these family members are victims too of his crimes, I mean, it's going to add more trauma, as well as there's going to be appeals most likely, because with the trial they're going to come through it. That's going to last years. Appeals last years. Also, after an appeal is post conviction relief that deals with anything that the attorneys did wrong, ineffective assistance of counsel. So a plea to life is going to give more closure, than a full trial, in my opinion. And I'm not saying, I don't, let me take that back. Not full closure. I don't know that they'll ever get full closure, right? I think there's still some answers like, why did he do it? We'll never know. And all the details of it. But there's a finality to the legal process. I guess that's what I meant. Not necessarily that there's closure in how these families feel, but there's a finality to the legal process, at least, to move forward as much as they can in this current life that they live without a loved one. But prosecutors do think about that stuff. They've been through trials. Us defense lawyers have been through trials. And I get nervous still going to trial. Once I get rolling, I get really excited. But this is what I do for a living. And if I'm in trial, I'm not sleeping. I am not resting. I am waking up in the middle of the night. What did I do today? Should I have done this differently? Should I have done this? And I would imagine every lawyer is doing that. And this is what we do for a living. So I can't imagine to be in a trial where it's all out of your control, these horrible images and details. I mean, can you think of the details that would have been testified? I'm sure they would have called, there were like one or two survivors, I think, in the house. Do you remember?
There were two girls that were on a
Yeah.
different floor that survived, but they did hear him go past, I
Yeah.
believe, and saw he had on like his shoes. Um, And in this case, I would like to point out, I think it is at least one, if not two of the families they were not happy with the plea. So the prosecution doesn't always have to do what the victim wants in these situations. Like, because it's not just about, it is about the victim, but it's not about the victim as well. Like, it is a legal decision, it is a strategy, and ultimately, this is the state bringing the case, not the victim. The victim could bring a separate
Good
case
point.
for, damages. Now, this man probably has no money, so there's nothing probably they could get. But like in Todd Colehep here, he did have money. And so the victim has brought a civil action where I think they've like liquidated assets for her to get money back. So the criminal case is, yes, we want to have the victims, this person stand trial for what they've done, but it is not the victim's case. It is the state's case. And I know, like, we don't like to think about this part of it, but I think there's also financial reasons for not having a death penalty case as well, because
Agreed.
death penalty cases are automatically going to be appealed. It is a right to have it appealed. There's going to be, like Lacey said, so many different appeals that are automatic. This is not, and they have to be given counsel. And there's not a lot of attorneys in the state that are death penalty certified. And there are not many that work for the state's payroll. So these are going to be private attorneys that are going to have to be paid somehow for these funds. And also, at the end of the day, you may not, while you get the death penalty, because of all these different things, there's all this money involved. But also, as far as the prison costs, right now we have 32 inmates, I believe, sitting on death row. They Execution rarely happens. So a life in prison versus execution is probably the same amount of time in jail a lot of times, because a lot of times these people die but naturally before they're ever executed. So it's
Yeah.
not all these people think, well, if you gave them the death penalty, it'd save money, we'd just kill them. They're not going to be executed. Most of the time, the stay is anywhere from 20 to 40 years before
Yeah.
someone is executed. I had a case when I clerked for Judge Cole in his 2007. It was a man who brutally murdered an elderly couple with a hammer. And I'm talking brutal. Like, it was
I
disgusting. He got
Yeah.
the death penalty, but he's nowhere close to being executed. And it's been 20 years and
Is
they
he
are
the one
still
that's
there.
been incompetent and still incompetent?
He's competent, but that's what
Oh,
they try
okay.
to
There's
keep
one that
arguing.
they
Well,
can't kill because he still is not competent.
he had no, so he has a disease that is called Prader-Willi syndrome. I'm an expert on that now after hearing the PCR, if you ever want to know about it. But so that's like, he keeps getting appeals because they are trying to say, but for this disease, he wouldn't have killed these people. And he brutally murdered these people. And I will say, I sat in a courtroom with him and I wasn't terrified, but also there were, a billion different people in there. And he was a tiny little man.
Yeah.
Um, but like, he's still sitting there and it's been 20 years almost. And he's no closer to being executed than he was 10 years ago. So he's
Right.
still there, still getting his 3 meals a day, all that stuff in the prison system. And he's also had some really high end attorneys have to come represent him through all this stuff that your taxpayer dollars paid for. So if it'd been life in prison, we wouldn't have paid all this other money for it. He just would be
Yeah.
sitting in prison.
And like you pointed out, these are constitutional rights. This is the foundation of our country. This is the
Right.
foundation of our justice system. And the reason it's designed this way is to help people that are truly innocent. But if we don't offer it to everyone, including those who are guilty of the most heinous of crimes, how can we save anybody's life that was found guilty? And we did a whole podcast series on frames, so we all know it happens. We know people are convicted when they're innocent, and in that book we know people have been executed. So if we don't give these freedoms to everybody, we're not going to be able to help those who are innocent. So therefore they go to everybody, even those guilty. And circling back, a good point that you mentioned was, you were talking about how it's the state's case and not the victim's case. That falls under the victim's bill of rights. And this is where I do think the prosecutors messed up in the Brian Kohlberger case. If what I read is true, right? I'm only having to go through news articles. One of the families said they only found out about the plea a few days before. So in South Carolina, we have what's called the Victims' Bill of Rights. And what that means is it is the state's job to notify the victims of case proceedings if they desire to be notified. They are supposed to tell them about offers, but victims don't get to say, hey, this is what I want you to do with my case. Because, like you said, it's the state's case, not the victim's case. There's a reason that we have laws prohibiting victims from prosecuting their own criminal matters. Because at the end of the day, what's supposed to be done is justice. And oftentimes, in cases, victims are biased to what they've been through, right? Where as a prosecutor is supposed to be unbiased and listen to this is what happens to the victim, but then I have a defendant maybe with no criminal history, and maybe they've done a lot of mitigation, they have a job, maybe they've gone to therapy and it's like a misdemeanor crime or something like that. All those things are supposed to take into account to seek what justice should be. And that would be hard for a victim to do, right? Hey, what do I want done in my case? And it would be hard for them to see the other side of the story, right? So that is why we have that. So in South Carolina, like I said, that's the Victims' Bill of Rights. And I think the prosecutors, if they have the same Bill of Rights that we do, should have sat down with the families way before this leaked, before it came out that there was a plea, or if they did, maybe a little bit sooner than that, and answered any questions that they had, right? Hey, this is why I came to this decision to take death penalty off the table. And maybe the family still would have disagreed, and that's fine, right? They have the right to feel the way that they feel. But I do feel in reading that, if that's true, that is where the prosecutors, I disagree with that, with just springing it on them a couple days before the plea. I felt like the victims' families deserved to truly sit down with the prosecutor and hear. And I mean, I think they should have told the families before they even offered it. Hey, I'm going to offer this. There's nothing you can do to change my mind, but I am going to make this offer to take the death penalty off. And here is why. I think the victims should have heard that. And I
I
think that
think
might be part of the
sometimes
issue of why they're upset.
it's hard too, though. Like timelines are so hard in cases because he could have came up and said, "Look, I like." The defense could have came to the prosecution and said, "Hey, can we talk a plea?" And in that
True.
moment, he decides to do it. And I know this sounds terrible, but people get scared and then want to back out. So maybe they wanted to strike
Right.
while he was in the mood to plea,
Yeah.
um, and do it then. And maybe it wasn't that the prosecution had pondered over it for a long time, but then he came and he said, "Look, if you'll take death penalty off, I'm willing to just plea and be done with this." And in that moment, they wanted to move quicker
Hmm.
in that situation. Because if you went to a judge and said, "I need to get him on the plea docket," any judge is going to say, "Yes, stick him on here." Like,
Yeah, because think of the docket space that that case would have taken. I mean, you're talking about money as well. A death penalty case is two trials. It is the initial phase of guilt or not guilty. And then, if found guilty, then they would move to a second portion of the case, which is essentially a new trial. You can call more witnesses on both sides until you reach a decision on the death penalty. So, like we said, this case would have dragged on for a very long time. You also have voir dire, which is questioning the jury to pick a jury. That would have taken a while. Sorry, my computer's about to die. And so all that goes into play for the prosecutors and the judges when navigating these plea negotiations.
yeah, because you also have to think of your back. I mean, I know like everybody deserves their time and that type stuff, but at the same point, you have a long list of trials to get through. I don't know if this is every state, but here in South Carolina, we have a short on judges, circuit court judges. We have open vacancies. People aren't wanting to do it. It is a high stress job. We also have the issue here in our state of judges that are on the bench handle both civil and criminal matters. And we are past the days of the general practitioner here. I think most states are moving towards this. We're more trying to just do certain areas of law. So we have less judges less attorneys that feel qualified to run for a judge right now. Not that they're not smart enough, but they've only done criminal or they've only done civil. So they're nervous about taking this on and not understanding how that world works. So just our whole judicial system is backlogged. And right now, if you're looking for a job, go become a court reporter because we definitely have a shortage of those.
Yeah.
And that's another thing. There's certain, like in civil cases, a lot of times we will waive having a court reporter and we'll just record stuff. But in a criminal case, you really want to make sure you have somebody in person,
Yeah.
especially this magnitude, taking this because what if your technology glitches? This is where, a human is a lot better than a robot pretty much in that
Right.
situation.
And like you were saying, I bet it is so nerve wracking for a judge to think about taking on a death penalty case and being certified. I am not certified, but mine and Lauren's classmate, Bobby Bank, he does death penalty defense. He's one of, I think, 2 lawyers in the state.
And I
Um,
did ask him to be on the podcast, but he said we would get him in trouble, and I don't know what that meant.
we wouldn't. Bobby, please come join us. I'll try to talk him into it. I'm gonna see him, I think, next month. He's helping me out with something else. But he was telling me about some stuff he was working on and showing me like his, voir dire stuff and just talking to me about some information about the death penalty. And I had no idea, and he does now because he has to at this point. But I mean, I've been doing this for over 10 years and he had so much more information than I did that because I don't do death penalty stuff and I don't think many defense lawyers do, have that certification.
Or if
Um,
you do, I feel like at a certain point, like I know there's one here in the upstate, and he switched and he does more civil because I think it just took doing death penalty cases has to take such an emotional toll on you because if you believe your client is innocent or you believe there was like intervening
mhm,
circumstances, so he should not be put to death, and you may have done nothing wrong, there's still going to be guilt on you that
right,
you caused this person, even though you didn't, in no
right.
way, shape, or
You have
form.
that
You as
feeling.
the attorney are going to have that guilt on you for the rest of your life. What? That's just how humans work. We'll feel
Yeah.
bad about it.
I've had clients get sentences I totally disagree with, and I blame myself. And even if my client did it, I still like, what did I do wrong? And I beat myself up for that. What could I it's hard for me to just say like, okay, well, my client did commit this crime. I put so much on myself because we get to know these people. A lot of times we get to know a version of these clients that the public judgment, those judging will never know. And it's such a blessing, but it can be such a curse too because you do carry that guilt no matter what your client did. Um, Wrapping up, there's a newer case, I think, coming up that has kind of sparked this conversation too. So in May, Alexander Dickey was arrested for a murder here in Richland County. There's a woman from North Carolina. Her name was Logan. She was down here staying with a friend, and the allegations are that Dickey broke into the home and killed her. I don't know the details of it. I don't know if it was just a home burglary and like maybe he got spooked and killed her, or maybe he entered with, gun already, like ready to fire. But apparently he committed a string of crimes, theft, car thefts, and stuff like that. And so the family, Logan's family, has an attorney, Dick Harpoolian. He said he was going to be sitting down with the solicitor's office. He was quoted in the news saying that he felt this was a death penalty case, and he planned on sitting down with the solicitor's office to see if they would seek it. And if you know Dick Harpootlian, he was the one that did seek the death penalty when he was a prosecutor, um, when he prosecuted Pee Wee Gaskins, which is a very well-known serial killer here in South Carolina. So
But he
I
also
don't.
represented Alec Murdaugh and did not think
He
he
did.
needed the death penalty.
So like. I've met Dick once, who's very nice. I made him laugh because I am a side comedian. But anyways, he's very kind to me. But he does switch his hats, right? Murdoch's giving him money. I don't want to do the death penalty, but he is a prosecutor. He has sought the death penalty. Now he represents this family and he wants the death penalty, but he didn't in that case. And so, we got to make a living, right? So I don't hate on him for it, but I do think it kind of makes you raise an eyebrow to, should we really trust his opinion on it? You get what I'm
And I
saying?
also think it's like one of those. I will say here in South Carolina, a lot of young attorneys start in the solicitor's office a lot of times because it's a great way to get trial experience.
Mhm.
And then they switch over to criminal defense because they want to make more money, want to be their own
You do not
boss.
make more money in defense.
Then being a prosecutor, they start out making like $35,000 a year.
Not anymore. The
The,
prosecutors almost always make more money than the public defenders. Maybe you don't
not
make
up
maybe
here.
really.
Not up here. It is the opposite. Like, yes,
Most
like,
places I have been, it the solicitors always make more than the defense, and they have had to fight tooth and nail to even try to make it close to even.
but you got to admit, private practice defense, where you can charge
Okay,
once you build up a practice.
that is true.
Dick Harpootlian probably had Alec Murdaugh wire him $1 million to even take his case to put in retainer, and I don't blame him one bit.
Right.
But I think a lot of people, it's not as black and white. We do switch sides, like, and how you represent things. I guess it's kind of like, it makes me think of Scandal with like Olivia Pope, like putting on her white hat, like depending on what
Yeah.
side you are when you wear this different hat, because we cross a lot. I don't. I never go into the criminal world at all, but I just know a lot of people go back and forth. And I have seen like some older attorneys decide to go back to the prosecution because they want insurance
Yeah.
because
State retirement.
state retirement, state insurance.
Hmm.
So, like, I think on TV, they make it like both sides hate each other.
Hmm.
And a lot of times it's not like that because they've been on both sides of the
Right.
table
Right.
um, with it.
In South Carolina, I will say I definitely think it depends on the county as well.
Hmm.
Horry County is such a tight knit bar. You will see prosecutors and defense lawyers having lunch in the middle of a trial. After a trial, there's such a big em- there's a lot of empathy between the two parties, and I do think there's a lot of that in Richland as well.
I think in Charleston, they kill each other because
In
I've heard that
Lexington,
on
not
the
at all.
Cecilia side.
I don't say not at all. There's some exceptions in Lexington, but I definitely don't feel like that Lexington has that empathy between the two parties where you can come together to. And I think, this is my opinion, I think you see more justice in cases where you can meet in the middle, when you can say, "Hey, I hear you this, I hear this," and truly seek out what justice is. And when you don't have that trust and you empathy for each side and can meet there, you're going to have cases that you don't feel like justice is met and you don't feel heard. Um,
Yeah, I
and
don't
in
think
those
you
counties, you charge more as a defense lawyer.
Well, and I don't think you have to be a jerk. Like, you see all these attorneys that think they have to be jerks. Everybody's just trying to advocate the best they can for their client, but
Mhm.
that does not mean you have to be mean to one another. And
Yeah.
it will, I know this is off topic and we're about to end, but it'll get on my nerves when I see people say, I need a real pit bull of an attorney that's going to da da da. I was like, scare tactics don't work. You need the law in your side. Now, granted, if you're in a car wreck, you may want a theatrical attorney who's
Sure.
good at like speaking in front of the jury, but like being a jerk does not mean they're a good attorney.
Right. Right. No. So anyway, so that's kind of the ins and outs of things to take into consideration, and not just the death penalty, but in any case, if you're reading something online and want to know like why this pled out, or why it was a life sentence instead of a death penalty, I hope y'all kind of take into what me and Lauren have said in consideration when forming your opinion on that sentence. Hopefully we've kind of taught everybody like what goes on in trial, what the victim's bill of rights really are about. And I think prosecutors get beat up sometimes for this stuff, and it's not fair to them because we don't know what they're dealing with when they made these offers, even with victims, in mind. Maybe this is what they wanted. We don't know that. So, take all these things into consideration. If y'all have any questions about the death penalty or things that might go on behind the scenes in plea negotiations with stuff like this, definitely drop us a message, comment below, and let us know.
And if Bobby Banks ever wants to be a guest star on this podcast or ever listen to it, we'd be happy to have him come talk about the actual life of being an attorney that does this. But we
Yes.
will see y'all next time.
If you know Bobby, tell him to come on our podcast. All right. Bye, Lauren.